Have you ever been judged just for how you look? Imagine walking into a luxury car dealership only to be mocked and kicked out in the most humiliating way possible because you don't look rich. That's exactly what happened to a woman named Maggie Collins at Boston Luxury Motors. But what the salesman didn't expect was she wasn't just anyone. And what happened next would make him regret it for the rest of his life. Don't look away, because this story isn't just full of drama, it holds a powerful lesson we all need to remember. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and let's uncover the truth behind appearances. Under the bright morning sun of Boston, the dealership Boston Luxury Motors stood like a palace of extravagance. Its gleaming glass walls reflected rows of exorbitant cars most people could only dream of. Porsche, Bentley, Ferrari, a symbol of power and status. But on that day, a woman walked through the glass doors with an appearance that starkly contrasted the opulence of the place. Margaret Collins, or Maggie as her friends called her, wore a simple white t-shirt and faded jeans. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her face bore no trace of makeup, exuding a down-to-earth, practical vibe. At 35, Maggie carried a quiet confidence, not flashy, but no one could guess the secret behind her modest exterior. Maggie was the founder of the Collins Foundation, a non-profit organization supporting children with disabilities, having raised tens of millions of dollars to transform the lives of thousands of families. She chose to live humbly, not out of necessity, but to stay connected to the people she helped. That day, Maggie arrived at the dealership with a special purpose to buy a luxury car as a 40th birthday gift for her sister Caroline. Caroline, who had just triumphed over breast cancer after a grueling journey, had always dreamed of owning a car straight out of a movie. With her personal wealth from the foundation and investments, Maggie could easily make that dream come true. But she had no idea that because of her appearance, she was about to face a deeply painful experience. As Maggie stepped into the showroom, her eyes were immediately drawn to a sleek, deep blue azure coupe priced at $285,000, displayed on a raised platform like a work of art. She smiled, picturing the joy on her sister's face when she received this gift. But that joy was quickly extinguished. Blake Thompson, the sales manager at the dealership, stood in the corner, adjusting his navy tie and smoothing out his expensive vest. With years of experience, Blake prided himself on his ability to read customers at first glance. Seeing Maggie in her plain attire, he smirked and muttered to a colleague, "Another dreamer. Watch me handle this quick." Before Maggie could say much to Daniel, a young, eager employee who approached to greet her, Blake interjected, "I've got this, Daniel," he said, then turned to Maggie with a fake smile. "Are you lost, Mom? Or did you wander into the wrong place? This isn't just anywhere, you know." Maggie, maintaining her politeness, pointed at the deep blue azure. "Actually, I'm interested in that car over there. I'm looking for a special gift." But Blake didn't let her finish. He scanned her from head to toe, his gaze lingering on her worn-out sneakers and faded jeans. "That's the limited edition Azure, only 15 made worldwide this year," he said, his tone slow and condescending, as if explaining to a child. "Starting price is $285,000. I think you'd be better off at our used car lot 3 blocks down. That might be more fitting for your situation." Maggie felt the judgment in every word, but she was no stranger to such situations. She had chosen to live simply not because she lacked means, but to stay grounded with the families she supported through the Collins Foundation. "I'm genuinely interested in this car," she responded patiently. "Could I see the interior?" But Blake only scoffed, not bothering to hide his contempt. "This car is for serious buyers, people who book appointments in advance. You're wasting my time. Or are you just here to snap photos for social media?" At that moment, a well-dressed couple walked in. Blake's demeanor changed instantly, abandoning Maggie as if she were invisible. He strode over to them, arms wide, with a beaming smile. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. Such a pleasure to see you again." Maggie quietly watched as Blake led the couple straight to the Azure, the very car he had just claimed was only for clients with appointments. He even opened the door, inviting Mrs. Harrington to sit inside while minutes earlier he refused to let Maggie even get a closer look. But the humiliation didn't stop there. As Maggie approached again to ask one more time, Blake turned back, his voice dripping with sarcasm, and loud enough for the entire showroom to hear, "Listen, lady, I know people like to daydream, but this is a place of business, not an amusement park. This car costs more than an average house. If you can't afford it, stop wasting my time. Either book an appointment and dress the part, or get out of here." The showroom fell silent, the air thick with tension. A few employees snickered, and nearby customers stared with a mix of curiosity and pity. Maggie felt the blood rush to her face, not out of shame, but from a simmering anger. She wasn't angry for herself. She was used to discrimination, but for anyone who had ever been treated this way just because of how they looked. "I believe my money is as good as anyone's," she said softly, her voice calm but resolute. Blake burst into laughter, the sound echoing across the showroom floor. "Cash, are you serious? This isn't a flea market. People who buy cars here don't dress like this." He gestured dismissively at her outfit, his eyes full of disdain. At that moment, another employee, a young woman named Emily, couldn't stand it any longer. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Blake, you're being too harsh. She's just asking for information." But Blake shot her a cold glare. "Emily, if you want to keep your job, don't interfere with my business." The dealership owner, Richard Mason, emerged from his office upon hearing the commotion. But instead of intervening fairly, he sided with Blake, nodding in agreement. "Ms. Collins, there may have been a misunderstanding. Our clientele typically understands the exclusivity of this establishment. I suggest you consider returning when better prepared." Maggie looked around, seeing the judgmental stares, Blake's smug grin, and the silence of the crowd. She said nothing more, simply turned and walked out of the dealership, her dignity intact but her heart aching. Behind her, Blake muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Some people never know their place." As the glass door closed behind her, Maggie stood under the morning sun, taking a deep breath. The humiliation stung like a knife to her pride, but she refused to let it break her. She pulled out her phone, dialed a familiar number, and a determined smile crept across her lips. "Alex," she said as the other end picked up. "I have something to tell you, and I think we need to do something about it." The next morning, Boston Luxury Motors shimmered under the early sunlight, its luxury cars on display like precious gems. Blake Thompson strode into the dealership in a self-satisfied mood, joking with colleagues about the daydreaming woman from yesterday. Who did she think she was? Just another person who didn't know her place, he said, his tone full of arrogance. He had just finished a morning staff meeting emphasizing the importance of judging customers correctly to save time. "We're not here to do charity," he reminded the team. Daniel, the young employee, kept his head down, clearly uncomfortable with Blake's approach. But at 10:17 a.m., everything changed. The distinctive roar of a powerful engine echoed outside, drawing the attention of everyone in the showroom. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors, a Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase, bespoke edition with a unique deep blue paint that seemed to shift under the sunlight, pulled up right at the main entrance. Its estimated value exceeded $1.2 million. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even Blake, who wasn't easily impressed by cars, felt his heart race. "What is that?" Richard Mason, the dealership owner, stepped out of his office, drawn by the sudden silence. A bespoke Phantom, Blake confirmed already, moving toward the entrance. Extremely rare configuration. Whoever owns it must be a big deal. A uniformed driver wearing white gloves stepped out of the Rolls-Royce and circled around to open the rear door with perfect precision. From the car emerged a man with an air of authority, Alexander Collins. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with salt and pepper hair neatly groomed, he exuded effortless confidence. But what caught Blake's attention most was the sharp gaze in his eyes, the look of someone who wasn't here to play games. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors," Blake called out loudly, trying to make an impression before any other employee could approach. "I'm Blake Thompson, sales manager. It's an honor to have you here today." Alexander looked at Blake with an unreadable expression, then offered a polite but cold smile. "Alexander Collins," he replied, extending a hand for a firm handshake. Blake's mind raced. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it right away. Regardless, the Rolls-Royce said everything about this man's financial status. "Mr. Collins, truly an honor. What brings you to us today? Perhaps I can show you our latest models." Alexander raised a hand, slightly cutting off Blake's rehearsed pitch. "Actually, I'm here for a specific car. The Azure Coupe, deep blue." Blake's smile widened. "Excellent choice, sir. Only 15 made this year worldwide. I'd be delighted to walk you through. I know where it is." Alexander interrupted smoothly. "My wife was here yesterday expressing interest in that car." Blake's smile froze a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Your wife? I don't recall. Perhaps one of my colleagues assisted her." Alexander's expression turned noticeably colder. "No, Mr. Thompson. You assisted her, or rather you refused to assist her. Margaret Collins. She was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. You suggested she didn't belong here and even mocked her in front of everyone." The blood drained from Blake's face as the realization hit him. Behind him, he heard a small gasp from Daniel, who was hovering nearby. But Alexander wasn't done. He turned to the gathering crowd of employees and customers, his voice ringing out strong and unwavering. "My wife, Maggie, is the founder of the Collins Foundation for Children with Disabilities. She has raised over $50 million to support families in need. She chooses to live simply, not because she lacks money, but because she wants to connect with the people she helps. But you, Mr. Thompson, judged her solely on her appearance and publicly humiliated her." The showroom was silent as a grave. Richard Mason hurried over, attempting to defuse the situation. "Mr. Collins, I'm deeply sorry to hear this. I assure you this isn't how we conduct business." But Alexander cut him off, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Mason. I had intended to purchase the Azure for Maggie's sister-in-law, along with 7 additional cars for my company's executive fleet deal that could save your quarter. But now I'm questioning whether this is a place worthy of my trust." Blake felt the ground crumble beneath him. He stammered, "Mr. Collins, I am so sorry. I didn't know." "Not knowing isn't an excuse," Alexander replied icily. "And your disrespect didn't just affect my wife. It affects anyone who has ever been looked down on in this place." At that moment, an unexpected twist unfolded. Emily, the female employee who had tried to speak up yesterday, stepped forward, her voice shaky but determined. "Mr. Collins, I witnessed the entire incident. Ms. Collins was treated horribly, and I tried to tell Blake it wasn't right, but I was threatened with losing my job if I interfered. I'm sorry I didn't do more." Alexander looked at Emily, his gaze softening slightly. "Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate that." He turned back to Blake, his tone hardening again. "As for you, I have a proposition. The Collins Foundation is hosting a fundraising gala next month to build an adaptive sports complex for children with disabilities. I want you to attend not as a guest, but as a volunteer. You need to see firsthand what real human value looks like, not through clothes or cars." But that wasn't all. Alexander suddenly pulled a phone from his suit pocket and played a recording. It was Blake's voice from yesterday, unmistakable and clear. Some people never know their place. The mocking whisper echoed through the showroom, leaving Blake pale as a ghost. "My wife recorded the entire interaction," Alexander said, his voice low but powerful. "I could easily send this to the press or even pursue legal action for discriminatory behavior, but I don't want to do that. I want you to learn a lesson, not be destroyed." A month later, at the Collins Foundation's fundraising gala, a grand Boston hotel transformed into a space brimming with joy and hope. Children with various disabilities and their families mingled with donors, medical professionals, and supporters. Near the entrance, Blake Thompson, no longer in his usual tailored suit, but in an event staff uniform, was guiding guests and assisting a young boy in a wheelchair named Thomas. The past month had profoundly changed Blake. Volunteering at the foundation initially felt like an obligation to save his job, but something unexpected happened. Seeing the daily struggles faced by children like Tomasa, 10-year-old who couldn't walk, but always beamed while playing adaptive basketball, Blake realized the shallowness of his previous worldview. He began to understand that human worth isn't in appearances or possessions, but in resilience and kindness. Maggie Collins, elegant in a simple green dress, approached him. Despite knowing who she was now, Blake was still struck by her lack of pretension. "How are you finding this experience, Blake?" she asked. He considered the question seriously, his eyes reflecting genuine sincerity. Humbling, he finally answered, and necessary. "I was wrong to judge you, Mrs. Collins. I'm truly sorry, not because I have to say it, but because I mean it." Maggie nodded, showing no malice. "The question isn't how wrong you were, but what you've learned. I've learned that a person's value isn't in their looks, status, or wealth." Blake replied, his voice thoughtful. "Everyone deserves respect until they prove otherwise, not the other way around." Maggie smiled faintly. An expensive lesson, but a valuable one. But the story didn't end there. Alexander joined them, placing a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. "Blake was just sharing some of his insights," Maggie explained. Alexander nodded, then unexpectedly said, "I hear you've become quite involved with the adaptive sports program. Thomas says you're a pretty decent assistant coach." Blake smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. Thomas is an amazing kid. He's taught me more than I could have imagined, not just about adaptive basketball, but about facing challenges with joy. Apparently I have terrible form, but Thomas isn't shy about pointing it out." Maggie laughed, a light but warm sound. "He's an honest coach. You've done well, Blake. I can see you genuinely care about the kids." Alexander nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at Blake. "I also hear you've been working with Mr. Mason to overhaul the customer approach at Boston Luxury Motors. No more judging based on appearances, and Daniel speaks highly of how you've changed and mentored him." Blake nodded, his voice resolute. "Yes, sir. We're building a training program on unconscious bias, and I'm the first to sign up. I don't want anyone else to go through what Mrs. Collins did." Alexander studied him for a moment, as if gauging the sincerity in his words. Then he said unexpectedly, "Good. That reminds me, the company fleet I mentioned, 7 cars for our executive team, still needs to be replaced. I'd like you to handle that deal. Daniel has spoken highly of the changes you've made and how you've supported him." Blake was stunned, his eyes widening, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. "Collins, I am honored, truly honored. I don't know how to thank you." But Alexander raised a hand, stopping him, and added a statement that caught everyone off guard. "There is, however, a condition. I want your dealership to sponsor an adaptive wheelchair sports program for children at the Collins Foundation. We need equipment and coaches to expand the program to more kids. If you and Mr. Mason agree, the deal will be signed next week." Blake didn't hesitate for a second. "We'll do it, sir. I promise. He'll personally ensure the program gets everything it needs. This isn't just business, it's the right thing to do." Alexander nodded, a small smile breaking on his face. "Good. I look forward to seeing the results." But the most emotional moment of the evening came right after. Thomas, the boy in the wheelchair Blake had been helping all evening, tugged at his sleeve and said in an innocent voice, "Mr. Blake, you know what, you're pretty cool for a grown-up. Can you play basketball with me again?" Blake knelt down, looking directly into the boy's eyes, and smiled. "Coming from you." Blake knelt down, looking directly into Thomas' eyes, and smiled. "Coming from you, Thomas. That's the highest compliment I've gotten in a long time. And of course, I'll play with you anytime you want." Thomas beamed, his face lighting up with excitement, and for a moment Blake felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. It was a far cry from the cold, calculating world of luxury car sales he'd been immersed in for so long. As the event wound down, Blake stood alone near the exit, watching Maggie and Alexander Collins work the room. They didn't flaunt their wealth or influence. Instead, they connected genuinely with every child and family they spoke to. He reflected on how completely his perspective had shifted. A month ago, he would have dismissed someone like Maggie based solely on her unassuming appearance. Now he understood that true value lay far deeper than designer labels, luxury cars, or executive titles. But the final surprise came just as Maggie approached him one last time before leaving. She handed him a small card, inside of which was a short, handwritten note from Caroline, her sister. It read, "Thank you for helping my sister choose the perfect car. It's not just a gift, it's a symbol of my victory over cancer. Maggie says you've changed, and I believe her. I hope you'll keep spreading that change." Blake read the note, his throat tightening with emotion. He looked up to respond, but Maggie and Alexander had already moved on, leaving him with a profound sense of gratitude and resolve. He clutched the card tightly, silently, vowing never to let prejudice cloud his judgment again. In a final, unexpected twist as Blake prepared to leave the gala, Richard Mason, the dealership owner, approached him with a sheepish expression. "Blake, I owe you an apology," Richard said, his voice quieter than usual. "I should have stepped in that day. I was wrong to side with your initial reaction instead of listening to Emily or Daniel. Seeing how you've turned this around, I've decided to match the sponsorship for the adaptive sports program out of my personal funds. And I'm promoting Emily to assistant manager. She showed more integrity than I did that day." Blake nodded, surprised but appreciative. "Thank you, sir. Let's make sure no one else feels unwelcome at our dealership again." The night ended with Blake taking one last look at the gala hall where laughter and hope filled the air. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something bigger than sales targets and commissions. He had been given a second chance, not just to save his career, but to redefine who he was. And he wasn't about to waste it. The story of Maggie and Blake isn't unique. Let's consider a real-life case in the U.S., like that of James Robertson, a black man from Detroit who was refused service at a high-end retail store simply because he was dressed in work clothes. Little did the staff know, James was a successful tech engineer. He later returned as a major customer, forcing the store to issue a public apology. Stories like Maggie's, Blake's, and James remind us that appearances never tell the full story of a person. Another striking example is the case of Oprah Winfrey, who in 2013 was reportedly snubbed at a luxury boutique in Switzerland. The sales clerk refused to show her an expensive handbag, suggesting it was too expensive for her, unaware that Oprah was one of the wealthiest and most influential women in the world. She later shared this story publicly, shedding light on the pervasive issue of prejudice based on appearance or race. These incidents aren't just isolated. They reflect a broader societal problem we all need to confront. So what's the biggest lesson from Maggie's story? Never judge someone based solely on what you see. A person's true worth lies in their actions, kindness and character, not in their clothes, cars, or bank accounts. Blake learned this lesson the hard way, but he changed. He didn't just save his career, he discovered a greater purpose in life. What about you? The next time you meet someone, will you look beyond their exterior? Remember, true wealth isn't in how much money you have, but in how you treat others, especially when you think no one important is watching. A small act of kindness can change a life, just as Thomas changed Blake and just as Maggie gave him a chance to make amends. If this story made you think, hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been misjudged or misjudged someone based on appearances? Tell us your story. Your experience might inspire others. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next inspiring story. Let's spread kindness together starting today. See you in the next video where another powerful lesson awaits.